Edge runner, afterlife. They're the kings of the trades, making moves in the shadows. They're the masters of the game, slipping on the profits, watching numbers rise and fall. Living fast, make or break. They risk it all. They risk it all. Late nights with
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll quickly review the recent price action of Nasdaq and continue with an update of my thoughts for next week. Before diving into the charts, let's do a quick review of the fundamentals. Starting with the events, on Tuesday we have customer confidence, on Thursday we have GDP and unemployment claims, and on Friday we have PCE. PCE is going to be the one you're going to want to keep an eye on for next week. For earnings, we have Nvidia on Wednesday after market hours. This could trigger some really interesting price action that can drive the direction for the rest of the week. And then for the COT data, we have some inconsistencies again. So what I'm seeing for S&P, non-commercials are net negative and commercials continue to hedge. And then for NQ, the non-commercials are net positive while the commercials are net negative. So based on what I'm seeing from the COT data, it sounds like there's an intent for S&P to bring the price down. But on the other hand, for Nasdaq, what we're seeing is it looks as if they want to bring the price up. So really complete opposite, and you would expect these to be aligned in terms of the direction that they want to bring the price. So I'm not going to put a lot of weight on the fundamentals for the time being. There are some things that I'm looking for in price action, and if I see those, then that will drive my bias in terms of direction for the coming week. Okay, now moving on to the charts. In last week's video, I was calling for potential shorts based on what I was seeing from the COT data. And if you look at the higher time frames, you can see that we are in between two weekly fair value gaps. We have a weekly fair value gap above, which for me is an important level. And we recently created a weekly fair value gap below after last week's price action. This will be important for my narrative for next week. And then if we go on the lower time frames, we start to see some interesting things here. So we mostly consolidated the first part of the week, and then we had one last drive up, sweeping liquidity, and then a massive push to the downside. And then you can see we've pulled back since then. We pretty much filled the 4-hour fair value gap, and after we drove down further again, if this was really bearish and we were looking at continuation at this point, I would have liked to see the logo, these equal lows swept, and then further continuation to the downside. But instead what we saw is another pullback after that drive to the downside, pushing back into the middle of the range. So it's a little unfortunate that we didn't push down lower, and it's also unfortunate that we didn't push up to the daily fair value gap above. But price action isn't going to do what you expect it to do, and that's why I gave several areas to watch for potential reversals. But for the time being, nothing is clear. It can still go either way. Although we have been consolidating for pretty much the entire week, I do feel that a big move is coming. But to be honest, I'm completely unsure which direction that's going to be for the time being. Fundamentals are starting to shift bullish, but we haven't really done anything to drive price up. We are still in the range. That is why we really need to see more price action to confirm which direction price leads us. For next week, I don't have a really strong bias for the next move. At this point, I can see it go either direction. But what I will be looking for is a trigger for the next move. And last but and that trigger, what I'll mainly be looking for is if we go down to the hourly time frame. So once again, we're starting to see liquidity building up on both the buy side and the sell side. So on the 4 hour, we had this sell side liquidity building up. On the 1 hour, we have this sell side liquidity building up. And then on the upper end, on the 4 hour, we have this buy side liquidity building up. And again, this is below the daily fair value gap. And we see hourly buy side liquidity building up as well, and you can see there is some inefficiency here as well. So based on that, what I would be looking for in terms of bearish scenarios or bearish triggers is I would like to see, sorry, I don't know why I have this labeled here, but what I would like to see is, again, for the bearish scenario, a sweep of some liquidity and then a massive reaction thereafter, pullback, and then continuation, driving lower, taking out these liquidity levels to the downside. And if we come into this sensitive area, which is going to be the daily fair value gap and the weekly fair value gap, a reaction, and then further continuation to the downside. If we don't see that further continuation to the downside, then there is potential for price to just reverse and sky and push to the upside. The other scenario I would be looking for in terms of bearish price action or bearish triggers would be a sweep of the liquidity above, potentially reaching up to the daily fair value gap, and then after that a really aggressive move away from it, pull back to inefficiency, continuation, and again drive further to the downside. And like I said, same thing applies for this scenario. If we don't see further continuation to the downside and see a massive reaction, then potentially it could reverse and just continue to the upside. In terms of bullish scenarios, so if we're going to be bullish, what I'd like to see is somewhere, whether it's sweeping the highs and then coming down, or just coming down from here, as we've already mitigated this 4 hour fair value gap, is a sweep of this liquidity, this liquidity coming into the daily fair value gap, and thereafter having a very strong reaction off of it, potential pullback for mitigation, and then continuation to the upside. And then in this scenario as well, once we start to get into these areas, if we do see a massive reaction right back down, then we are at risk for price reversing and continuing further to the downside. But if we really are bullish, what I would like to see is a flip of the fair value gap, retest, and then continuation higher. And then at that point, I think it's safe to say we would be targeting the all-time highs. So like I said, I don't really have a strong bias for next week. What I'm looking for is patterns in the markets to give me a trigger of what to expect after. So I do want to see liquidity swept, whether it's to the upside or to the downside. That next reaction will be my trigger on which direction I would like to see price to go for the rest of the week. And one last thing to note, it's a really important point. As I've been recording this video, the attack on Israel has started. This could have a massive impact on the price action next week, as we need to see how the markets react to this geopolitical event. This could potentially be the event that triggers the next move to the downside. And that sums up my thoughts for this week. Unfortunately, it took much longer to get through than I anticipated, but there were a lot of important details to get through for this video. And I do think we have a big move coming, so please be patient and wait for the markets to show its hand so you don't take losses and miss a big move. If you have any questions or comments on my analysis, leave them below. Otherwise, I'll see you for the next one. Peace.